The golden dust of the savannah clung to my feet as I pushed through the tall millet fields. The sun hung low, a heavy orange coin dipping toward the horizon, casting long, reaching shadows from the baobab tree. I looked up at the vast, darkening sky, tracing the patterns of the stars with my fingertips. I whispered to the wind, "I will love someone, and he will love me forever." My mother stood by the doorway of our hut, her hands stained with the earth from the harvest. She watched me with eyes that had seen decades of seasons. I turned to her, my voice bright with the certainty of youth. "One day," I said, "I will have a love story people talk about." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward me. She placed a firm hand on my shoulder and looked into the distance. "Love is not just feelings, my daughter," she said, her voice steady. "It is wisdom, too." I did not understand her then. I thought love was a flame that burned bright and never flickered. I spent my afternoons weaving grass and dreaming of a stranger who would find me in these fields. I imagined a man who would walk through the golden stalks, his eyes searching only for mine. I believed that if I held onto this dream tightly enough, the universe would bend to my will. The seasons turned cruel. The village elders spoke of a drought that would turn our golden fields into gray dust. My father packed our few belongings into a cart. We left the only home I had ever known, walking for days until the horizon turned unfamiliar. The savannah vanished, replaced by the city, a place of noise and gray stone that smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. I felt small here, untethered. Then, I met him. He spoke with a voice like honey, smooth and deliberate. He promised me a life that mirrored my childhood dreams, a sanctuary away from the harshness of the streets. I listened to his words and felt the ache of the long journey fade. I gave him my trust, my time, and every ounce of my hope. I ignored the signs my mother had warned me about, the way he looked past me rather than at me. I mistook his control for protection. I was convinced that the universe had finally bent to my will. I walked through the crowded gray streets beside him, eyes fixed only on his face. The dream I carried in my heart began to fray at the edges. It started with the silence. He stopped coming home when the sun set, leaving me in the dim light of a room that never felt like mine. He stopped looking at me when he spoke, his eyes always drifting toward the door or the window, anywhere but at my face. I found myself sitting in a small, cold room, staring at the wall, waiting for a knock that never came. The air in the apartment grew heavy, stagnant. I checked the lock, then checked it again. I paced the floorboards until my feet ached, listening for the sound of his key in the latch. Hours stretched into days. The love I thought was sacred became a cage, built of his absences and his cold, measured indifference. I watched my own reflection in the darkened window and barely recognized the person staring back. I had lost my voice. The city lights flickered below, a grid of cold, artificial stars. I stood by the glass, my forehead pressed against the pane, and finally saw the shape of the life I had built. It was a hollow shell. The man I waited for was a stranger, and the love I had chased was nothing more than a shadow cast by my own desperation. I turned away from the window. The room was silent. I walked to the dresser and pulled out a small, worn bag. I did not take the items he had bought for me. I opened the velvet box on the vanity, tipped the gold rings and chains onto the hard wood, and watched them slide into the dark corner. They meant nothing now. I packed only the barest essentials, a change of clothes, a few coins, and the heavy weight of my own resolve. My hands did not shake. I walked to the door, gripped the handle, and turned it. The lock clicked open. I stepped out into the hallway, the air cool and biting against my skin. I did not look back at the room. I walked down the stairs. The pavement felt solid under my feet. Above, the city smog choked the stars, turning the sky into a bruised gray haze. I kept my eyes forward, moving past the shuttered storefronts and the distant hum of traffic. The silence of the night brought the memory of my mother back to the surface. She had told me that love was wisdom, not a promise. I finally understood. It was the strength to turn away when the light faded. I reached the end of the block and stopped, looking at the reflection of the street lamps in a puddle. The girl who had dreamed of golden fields was gone. I stood straight, breathed in the cool, sharp air, and whispered to the empty street, "I am enough." I turned the corner and kept walking, my pace steady, leaving the broken pieces of my past behind.